So again, welcome to the 5th meeting of the UNESCO Working Group on Open Science Infrastructures. And if you're a regular and are concerned that you missed the 4th meeting, we had an all-group meeting in February, which we counted as the 4th, so hence we're numbering this the 5th. So this working group met in July 2022, September 22, March 23, and February 24, as I just mentioned. It's very good to see continued interest. I see already 72 participants, and that's still rising now. So as you can see from the agenda, and it's in front of you on the screen now, we have a very interesting session ahead of us this morning or this afternoon. And the main part of that is two very interesting presentations. The first one on open science and artificial intelligence from Areeq Chowdhury from the Royal Society. And following that, open science at the Generative AI Turn from Mohammad Hosseini from the Feinberg School of Medicine in the USA. And then we'll have time for question and answer after that, and then look a little bit at some of the next steps for this group. So without further ado, let me please give you a quick update and start with some brief background. Hopefully most of this is very familiar to you all, but I'll go through just a couple of slides very, very quickly. So just as a reminder, at the 41st session of the UNESCO General Conference in 2021, the 193 member states, now 194, unanimously adopted the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation. And this was developed through a long process using a regionally balanced, multi-stakeholder, inclusive and transparent consultation process. And this, what we can call landmark international agreement, defines the shared values and principles for open science, identifies the measures to make open science more accessible, the scientific process more inclusive, and the outputs of science more readily available and relevant to society. The assistance, support and promotion of numerous actors from all around the world in developing and leading the successful adoption of this recommendation, and subsequently through the various working groups and other means in terms of its implementation and monitoring, is very much appreciated. Many of you with us today have been involved in that process. So once again, many thanks and our huge appreciation for that and for your ongoing interest. So this meeting, as previously, is in the context of the implementation of this recommendation. And as I'm sure you know, for this, we set up 5 different working groups, and they're here on the screen in front of you. So on capacity building, on policies and strategies, in financing and incentives, on infrastructures, which we are today, and also on the open science monitoring framework. And if we recall the recommendation, one of the 7 areas of action defined by the recommendation is, and I'll quote, systematic and long-term strategic investment in science, technology, innovation, with emphasis on investment in technical and digital infrastructures and related services, including their long-term maintenance. And the broad objective of this working group on infrastructures is to gain a better understanding of the current ecosystem, internationally, regionally, of thematic open science platforms for sharing knowledge and best practices, and understanding the key gaps and challenges for their effective and sustainable development, use and maintenance. And the specific focus was on thematic platforms in UNESCO's priority areas, so biodiversity, water, disaster risk reduction, geosciences, open sciences, climate change, and so on. But one issue, of course, which is everywhere, we all know, is artificial intelligence. And it's an issue that's been increasingly raised and discussed in our working groups. And many members recommended or suggested that we include this to start looking at in a little more detail in one of the working groups, and hence our focus today, and more on that shortly. So if we just go to the next slide, just to touch on the specific deliverables so far. We've prepared, with your assistance, with the assistance of this group, a checklist guide, which was part of the, which is part of the Open Science Toolkit on infrastructures in line with the recommendation. So this is a guide Now they're linked to the toolkit, and the various things will be at the end of the presentation. There's a QR code here at the bottom as well. And also an index of open science infrastructure supporting the sharing of knowledge of information in the priority areas I mentioned. So we have a compilation of thematic open science knowledge sharing platforms, and it's already rather well formed. Sorry, I just need to shut the window. I think our Latin America week seems to be starting already. So it's already quite populated in terms of thematic open science knowledge sharing platforms, but it's an ongoing activity. Please have a look on the website if you haven't done so, and we're still open for contributions and to inform us of other relevant platforms. And in addition, the meeting reports for this and all the other working groups are available on our website. So please see those if you haven't, and the link's been kindly added to the chat. Okay, so as mentioned, AI, and in this context, AI and open science is of increasing interest, both in terms of the challenges and the opportunities, the risks and the benefits, and also just to get a better understanding of the issue of this issue is something we're starting or hoping to look at as a group, and then ultimately to create some specific outputs and information that can be useful and informative to the open science community and further. So with that in mind, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for our first presentation. So our first speaker is Areeq Chowdhury, who's the Head of Policy, Data and Digital Technologies at the Royal Society. And he will be presenting on artificial intelligence and open science, learnings from the recent Royal Society publication on AI, how artificial intelligence is changing the nature and method of scientific research. So Areeq, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Ezra. Just give me 1 second to share my slides. Okay. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Areeq. As Ezra said, I'm the Head of Policy for Data and Digital Technologies at the Royal Society in London. And I'm going to talk to you about a report that we published last week called Science in the Age of AI, which looks at how AI is changing the nature and method of scientific research and has a focus on some of the challenges and opportunities around open science. And I'll give a high-level overview of what those are shortly. If you're not familiar, the Royal Society is the oldest continuously existing scientific institution in the world. We're also the UK's National Academy of Science, and we have a role, therefore, in advising governments and other decision makers in issues related to scientific research. And our mission is to promote the development of science for the benefit of humanity. Most importantly, we're a fellowship of some of the world's leading scientists. So historically here, you can see some of them on screen: Einstein, Hawking, Turing, Darwin, Babbage, Newton. I think it's Kathleen Lonsdale there we've got in the middle. And more recently, you can see some of our AI and computer science related fellows on the screen. Vint Cerf, co-founder of the internet; Geoffrey Hinton, you may be familiar with, who left Google last year; Yoshua Bengio; Ilyas Utskiva, who was until recently the CTO of OpenAI. And bottom left, you'll recognize there is Elon Musk, who is also a fellow of the Royal Society. And this fellow, Alison Noble, is the chair of this project, Science in the Age of AI. She will be at UNESCO actually later this week talking about this this project, a joint event we're organizing. And she led this expert working group, which is made up of AI scientists, so users and developers of AI. So you have people like Peter Dyan, who's quite an influential voice in the development of AI. You have people like Abigail Sellen from Microsoft Research. And as well as this, we have some ethical experts like Sabina Leonelli from the University of Exeter, who all have contributed to this project around 18 to 24 months in duration. What did we do? First of all, we In total, engaged with more than 100 leading scientists from disciplines as diverse as astrophysics to paleontology, to really understand how AI is transforming research from their perspective, and as well as thinking about some of the future challenges. And last year, ahead of the Global AI Safety Summit, we had a particular focus on some of the AI safety risks across scientific disciplines, which we will be publishing a short summary note in the next few weeks. But here you can see we did a few roundtables on specific aspects around reproducibility, immersive technologies, the environmental impacts of AI, workshops on disinformation, scientific disinformation and AI, horizon scanning. And we also did 2 international workshops. One was in Washington with the National Academy of Science. It was the US-UK Forum on Research Access to Data, which I think some of the people on this call were present. And the second one we did in Beijing, the Chinese Academy of Science on AI ethics, which has also contributed to the development of this report. And finally, we commissioned some external research. These were a taxonomy of AI technologies across scientific disciplines, a patent landscape of AI technologies, again, where AI is being used for scientific research, and then finally a historical review on how science has been disrupted by technology more generally. These all had some limitations. The patent landscape in particular only gives you a sense of what is being filed for. A lot of those things might not necessarily be translated into products, but it does give a good understanding of how the private sector is approaching the development of AI for science and who some of the key players are. And also our taxonomy was based on scanning academic literature, which may not have included some preprint articles as well. So they are limited, but they do give a good indication of how AI is transforming scientific research. Here you can see just an overview of what the report actually looks at. So first of all, a general overview of how AI is transforming research, what it's enabling, what it's making more difficult. A chapter on research integrity and trustworthiness, which may be quite relevant to today's conversation. Interdisciplinarity is a really key theme of the report and something that Alison Label, the chair, is very keen on. And this is about how do we prevent a scenario where you're just having AI developers trying to solve scientific issues and scientists trying to develop AI applications from scratch, and how do you actually get those two groups to work together? And most importantly, how do you incentivize that collaboration through career progression, which is the key challenge that came out in a lot of our interviews, is that simply there is no reward for doing, or limited reward for doing interdisciplinary research. Finally, there are chapters on ethics and AI safety, and also the role of the private sector, which again makes the challenge of open science and AI quite difficult. And finally, there are some case studies of how AI is being used across material science, climate science, and rare disease research. So the report calls for action in these 3 areas, and with some specific recommendations that I'll go over shortly. The first is to enhance access to essential AI infrastructures and tools. Secondly, to build trust and integrity in the quality of AI-based scientific outputs. And finally, to ensure the safe and ethical use of AI in scientific research. And here are these, across these 3 areas, we make these 4 specific recommendations. The first is that governments, research funders, and AI developers should improve access to essential AI infrastructures. Second, that funders and AI developers should prioritize accessibility and usability of AI tools developed for scientific research. Third, that research funders and scientific communities should ensure AI-based research meets open science principles and practices to facilitate AI's benefits in science. And finally, that scientific communities should build the capacity to oversee AI systems used in science and ensure their ethical use for the public good. So recommendation 3 is the most relevant, and we do call out to the UNESCO's recommendation on this. The key challenge here is around how do you actually implement those principles into practice, and what effect does that have on the nature of scientific research, which is often about reproducibility. And here is a table from the report which highlights some of the key barriers to reproducibility, which is around the inherent challenges with machine learning systems in terms of reproducibility due to things like computational power, some of the environmental conditions like the hardware and software, the documentation challenges. We went to a visit to a research laboratory in Oxfordshire called the Rutherford, I think it's in Oxfordshire, called the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. And this is a huge site with lots of experiments taking place. And one of the people we spoke to there highlighted just a very basic challenge around documentation of metadata around experiments. So you would have researchers coming in and simply labeling experiments as run 1, run 2, run 3 without detailing any of the sort of challenges or what was actually being tested. So there are some very basic challenges around reproducibility that are also highlighted in the report as well. And the final two are things that need to be continuous improvements in the research landscape. So these are around skills and training. Again, data quality is a hugely important challenge. Do we have the people who are able to build high quality data sets and also understand where the limitations are of different types of data? And finally, the incentives around career progression and also the incentives between the private sector and publicly funded research. Some specific ones to highlight. So we did a forum in DC about research and access to data. If we are to use some of these AI tools for anything but useful, important, real-life applications, that data underpinning it needs to be of high quality. And at the moment, this isn't necessarily always the case. Even if you look at kind of lower risk applications like AI literature review tools, it's not always clear what literature they're being trained on. It's not clear how whether different research from different communities is being left out. And at the moment, it's not easy to interrogate the training data of lots of tools out there to even know whether the data is high quality or not. Second is around commercial sensitivities. There is, of course, lots of profit-driven reasons to not adopt open science principles and to share infrastructure with competitors, and this needs to be overcome if we are to make the most of AI for scientific research. And another area that we point to in the report is the use of privacy-enhancing technologies, which the Royal Society has done a lot of work on. And this is about methods of gaining insights from data without needing to access it necessarily. Third is black box challenge. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It's not always clear how, due to the amount of data that's going into the systems, it's not always clear how the relationships that are being found are being made, and therefore it's not clear how to test these properly for their robustness and quality. Incentives for disciplinary research I've spoken about already. And finally, the privacy concerns is another important aspect, because it may not be desirable to apply open science principles in some cases. For example, when it's related to health data, there'll be lots of personal sensitivities, potentially a lot of reverse engineering that could be done through AI systems. And in those scenarios, it might not actually be desirable to implement open science practices, or legal. There may be legal restrictions as well, depending on the jurisdiction. And here we include a reproduction of a gradient of system access developed by Hugging Face. And here you can see a little bit what I was talking about here. Open science could be a gradient it doesn't need to necessarily be black or white. So on the left here, you can see there are some fully closed platforms that cannot be accessed at all by scientific researchers or auditors. And on the right-hand side, you can see how slowly you go from gradual release to fully open platforms. So this really is the gradient of access that is occurring at the moment in AI-based scientific research. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes that speak to some of these challenges. The first here is from a participant at one of our roundtables on reproducibility. So we're getting to a scale of data and complexity that you can't do all yourself, or you can, but you will be limited. And if you want to be successful, you need to understand how to collaborate and co-create with people. And that is hard. It is painful and it is slower, but potentially more impactful. If you want quick results, do it yourself. And if you want impactful things, you need to work together and do things differently. And I think this speaks to a challenge that isn't really implemented enough, at least in the UK, when it comes to the adoption of open science, which is actually getting researchers to work together. Again, enabling open access in AI research means a lot of documentation and publishing that documentation alongside your academic research. And at the moment, there are no or limited incentives to actually do that. There's no career reward or progression necessarily to produce these reproducibility checklists, or necessarily career progression for publishing in a journal that's outside of your field of research. And these need to change if we're really to see open science promote beneficial results when it comes to AI-based research. Finally, this is a quote from a presenter at the US UK Forum, which stuck with us a lot. So this is, everybody wants a sparkly fountain, but very few people are thinking about the boring plumbing system underneath it. And again, this is key with AI. And you may have seen it over the past 12 to 18 months, the sort of cycle of hype and excitement around some of these AI tools that are coming out, which is now being met with some pessimism and some concern around the legality of training data underpinning some of these systems, but also how useful they are in practice if the outputs can't be trusted. And this is the key thing in our reports, which is there's huge potential for AI in scientific research, but the most important aspect is the quality of those outputs and the integrity of those outputs, and developing a path towards achieving that, which requires things like data collection, data quality, thinking about the size of data that's being collected. We look at things like astronomy data, for example, which is could be measured in terabytes. And therefore it's very hard to access that kind of data. But also the sort of skills and training involved, and the need to foster interdisciplinary research. These are the aspects that need to happen next when it comes to adopting open science for AI, and also finally much more understanding of the training data that underpins a lot of these tools that people are starting to use. So hopefully that gives you a good high-level overview. I'm very happy to take any questions now or later in the discussion section.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Areeq. That was very interesting. Huge amount covered, and I'm sure there'll be many questions. But I think we'll take the second presentation, and then we'll open up for the discussion of everything. Just one small question. I mean, not really question for me, but if people are interested in getting a copy of this report, maybe you could just say now how they can do that, please.
Yeah, I will post a link in the chat now.
Brilliant.
And
Thank
of course,
you.
we're doing an event together on Thursday, so if you're around, you can.
Yep. Okay. But for people online, they please look in the chat for the link, or go to the Royal Society website, I guess. Otherwise, if you can't do that, okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you, Areeq, subsequently in the discussion. So I'm sure there'll be many questions for you. So thank you very much. So the second of our presentations is from Mohammad Hosseini. who's assistant professor at the Department of Preventative Medicine at the Feinberg School of Medicine, USA. And the title of the presentation is Open Science at the Generative AI Turn. Mohammed, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks for this great opportunity. My name is Mohammed, and I'm here to present a recent preprint I worked on together with some of my colleagues, Serge Horbach in Radboud University, Christy Holmes here at Northwestern in Chicago, and Tony Ross-Haller in Graz. I'm going to paste the link to our preprint here. And what I'm going to do next is to share with you a summary that we turned into this table/graph, and I'm going to just briefly mention some of the highlights of our work. So what we did was that we started with the UNESCO Open Science taxonomy. And we went, one by one on the elements of the taxonomy to see what are the positive and negative impacts of generative AI on that specific aspect of open science. So, for instance, in terms of open scientific knowledge, one of the elements of the taxonomy is scientific publishing and open access. We believe that one of the major advantages of using generative AI in modern science is the sort of transition from open to meaningful and equitable access. So for the most part, in the last so many years, we've really had a lot of focus on access without thinking about, well, people might have access, but do they really understand it? Do they really, can they really make sense of it and put it to use? We think that because of the fact that generative AI technologies have this potential to, synthesize and provide a sort of shorter, digestible summary of content. In that sense, they can improve. They can definitely improve meaningful access. They can also help us with coping with information overload. But then on the flip side, they also enable, for instance, paper mills and fake publications. They increase biases and misinformation. And one of the interesting things that we anticipate at the moment is that they can deter researchers from openly sharing the research out of a fear that the content is going to be harvested without any attribution. And this fear comes from the fact that many of these generative AI models have not disclosed the sources they use to train their data, to train their models. And we think, given that, state of things right now, researchers might feel a little bit apprehensive about sharing their research because they know that it's going to be harvested. And well, at the moment, it is being harvested without attribution, and that is a dangerous trend. In terms of open research data, well, on the positive side here, on the left side, we think that generative AI can definitely support research data management, data sharing, documentation, analysis, and curation. And there's several examples of these that are mentioned in the preprint. They can also help researchers detect errors and inconsistencies in data sets. They can also help researchers create synthetic data sets. Synthetic data set is one of those things that I think is at the moment under discussed. We should all be extremely wary of the dangers that may come with synthetic data sets. They can be used in so many ways for education, for improving privacy and so on. But at the same time, they can also be used in malicious ways. And at the moment, we don't have a very clear guideline about how to use synthetic data, how to disclose it, how to highlight what parts of the data are synthetic, what parts of the data are real. Actually, what is the difference between real data and synthetic data? So these are like really challenging conceptual and practical issues we have with synthetic data. But generative AI can create those, and in that sense, we see it as a sort of positive development. They can also, on the flip side, on the negative side, They can fabricate data sets. They can worsen the reproducibility and integrity challenges we have at the moment because, you know, they may use unvalidated methods. In terms of open source software and source code, definitely there's many examples of generative AI increasing productivity and efficiency, or in improving documentation about code and reviewing code in real time, and so on. And negative, on the negative side, it is, you know, it is feasible to say that they can increase code inaccuracies and certain biases. Like there are some examples of generative AI generated codes that are biased towards resourceful contexts. So they might not be necessarily practical in areas where you have like not as many powerful systems or not as many high quality resources. In terms of open evaluation, we think that generative AI can enhance evaluation of scholarly contributions and increase reviewer pool when it comes to reviewing. This is a little bit on the gray side at the moment because there are many publishers that have banned the use of generative AI for peer reviews. Some funders have also done that, but things might change. On the flip side, we think that generative AI can increase the risk of fake review reports and compromise confidentiality. In terms of open science infrastructure, we think that generative AI will enhance efficient use of open repositories and scholarly indices. But then on the other side, it can compromise reproducibility. It can, you know, risk monetization of research information and lead to further restrictions. In terms of open engagement of social actors, we think that generative AI definitely increases opportunities for effective engagement of more parties, and it can level the playing field for citizen scientists by you know, increasing their access to the pool of open knowledge, basically. On the other hand, we think that it can increase the likelihood of technological dependence, and it can maybe increase also inequity. It can also spread misinformation and increase the risk of, you know, shaping public opinion based on false information, especially if this is in sensitive contexts like, you know, healthcare or medicine. We have some examples of this as well. In terms of open dialogue with other knowledge systems, well, you know, we think that generative AI can facilitate knowledge exchange across different communities. It can help us with all kinds of translation from discipline to discipline, but also translation of science from, you know, the bench to policy kind of workflow. And finally, you know, we think that it could increase biases, especially in favor of the global South. And also it can increase the likelihood of mistranslation and misrepresentation. As a result of this analysis, we come up with some recommendations. We have recommendations for 3 specific cohorts. The first one is researchers. We think that before using generative AI, researchers should try to identify and mitigate risk of bias. They should make sure that AI is actually the most effective and suitable substitute for human labor. And part of the rationale for this recommendation is that, you know, these systems are extremely resource intensive and have a major ecological footprint. We think that, you know, we as researchers, we should try and find the most open and the most fair generative AI models. At the moment, we know that common and extremely popular models like ChatGPT are actually not open and don't really comply with open source values, open science values. And finally, since researchers are responsible and accountable for any errors or biases, they should use these systems responsibly and transparently. We also have recommendations for institutions, funders, and publishers. First and foremost, and this is also something that Areeq mentioned, we believe that they should really up their game in terms of providing training for their employees. They should investigate and monitor positive and negative impacts of generative AI in their own context. You know, we as researchers, I as someone who's, you know, open science and generative AI enthusiast, I can think about various ways in which generative AI can have a positive or negative impact on someone else's workflow. But I think at the end of the day, people know much better how their context is going to be affected, and in communicating those effects with other people, they can definitely prevent you know, errors or inconsistent use of these systems in different contexts. We also think that institutions, funders, and publishers should monitor and counteract ways that AI can reinforce epistemic hegemonies. And with that, we mean, you know, again, as I said, we think that these systems can, at the moment, they are probably a little bit more biased towards the global north. And, you know, they, because they are developed here, they are trained on a lot of content that is developed in the global north. They are not very representative, and in that sense, they can, you know, reinforce existing biases that exist. We also have some recommendations for open science advocates, like for all of you. And one of them is that we should all be aware that these systems have a great potential for misinformation and fueling misinformation, especially in a year like this year where we have all kinds of elections around the world. I think they can be used by malicious actors to represent or misrepresent scientific facts into misinformation that can be used by political campaigns or by all kinds of actors. And this is something that we should constantly be aware of and be critical of. And lastly, we think that generative AI has a chilling effect on sharing. And again, this goes back to my earlier point about the fact that these systems at the moment, many of them are using available knowledge without proper attribution. And you know, that can deter people from openly sharing their content. With that, I hope that you enjoy reading the paper. If you have any comments or recommendations, please, by all means, feel free to reach out and provide your comments and recommendations. We would love to have that. And I'm more than happy to engage in any Q&A. And thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Again, a very interesting presentation, huge amount there, and many concerns and challenges, I guess, we need to consider. But thank you very much. So we'll and just to mention, so the link to the preprint is in the chat for anyone that didn't see. So please look in the chat if you wish to get a copy of the paper. We'll now hand over to Anna, please, to moderate the discussion. So please, Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ezra, and many thanks to Mohammad and Areeq for the great presentations. I myself have a lot of questions, but I'll first open up the floor for our participants. Please raise your hands. I already see there is a lot going on in the chat, but it would be good to also open up the discussion for everybody else. So please, if you have a question or if you have a comment, if you have a recommendation, idea, perspective, now is the time to raise your hand and share it with the rest of the group. Ezra, go ahead.
Sorry, I was a bit quick. I should have let others go first. It's a fairly simple question. On the radio today, I heard, interestingly enough, a piece in the news today, and it was regarding medical issues. And it was, I mean, it was using AI to do an analysis of a particular blood test for suspected heart attacks. And previously it took a whole day and the person had to stay in a bed, using a bed that would otherwise be used by someone else. And it just the interesting thing, and it was obvious by its repetition, was that the AI analysis of anonymized data, and it was said, I think 3 or 4 times in the interview. So this clearly is an issue. And Areeq, you mentioned specifically about medical data being an issue. But if something like this is so beneficial, what are the ways we can see of being able to use medical data, or the patients being comfortable for their data to be shared and not, I mean, what kind of security can one consider?
That's a good question. I mean, Mohammed talks about it a little bit as well. I think synthetic data is one way around some of the sensitivities of using real world data. So if you want to train up some of these systems to be able to detect in the real world, using synthetic data could be one way around it. Although for lots of reasons that isn't perfect. In the UK, they've got something called Open Safely, which we present at the US UK forum that fed into this report as well. And these are ways of physically securing data, that in this case, health data, so that there'll be ways potentially around it. Another aspect is around gaining consent from users as well. There's an interesting debate I had with one researcher whose name I've forgotten now, but there was a discussion about whether in the UK, because we've got the National Health Service, it's like a publicly owned for the people health service. There was a debate that was had about whether anyone should have the ability to opt out of sharing their health data, because the NHS is a public service for the public good, and actually being able to opt out is against that principle. And the analogy they gave was, if you go to visit your doctor at the GP, and you had an unusual condition, you would expect them to retain that understanding and institutionalize it so they can help others. And it's quite an interesting debate actually about whether that should be the same case for all health data. So if you could use everyone's health data to produce this AI tool that you mentioned that you heard on the radio this morning, should that actually come ahead of people's desire to share data? But that's just an interesting debate, which probably isn't going to happen, again, for the sort of legal restrictions, not least that I mentioned. But I would recommend looking at our report on privacy enhancing technologies. It's called From Privacy to Partnership, and part of this also looks at how we can gain access to some of these locked away health data sets as well. I'll post a link in the chat.
Great, thanks. Thank you. I have John, then Ish, and then Francis.
Hello, everyone. I'm representing the International Union of Crystallography, and just by a brief introduction, to say that our science affords us to see atoms by a range of methods, and we have wide-ranging applications in academic research, but also industrial research. And so a gap that I see in both of these excellent presentations, reports and preprint, and thank you, Areeq and Mohammed, is the scope and interaction with private enterprise. Anna and Ezra will know this as a sort of a regular chestnut of mine. But just to commend to you the very recent UK government House of Commons Science and Technology Cross-Party Committee report on AI and governance, and I'll put the link in the chat. What I find very good about the, especially under the current membership of this Science and Technology Committee, is that they're very wide-ranging interests and deep interests in science, but they basically as whenever they invite a company to present, I think the companies regard this almost like a summons, and so they do try and participate. And you'll see in the provision of evidence as well to this report. There's a wide range of industries contributing their views on AI and its use. And there is one very specific point on industry and persuading industries to collaborate, and that is that they are well versed in this, and they have pre-competitive phases. So in my area of science, the advanced photon source at Chicago, the pharmaceutical companies have collaborated to build a common instrumentation beamline to facilitate their research in macromolecular crystallography. It's called the Industrial Macromolecular Crystallography Association beamline. And so some 10 companies work together to develop that facility, and then they do their own confidential thing during the work. Anyway, bottom line, I'll put that web link in the chat. I commend that report to you. They have achieved more than a UK focus, but obviously it's limited in that sense. And Mohammed made that point very nicely about bias in training. So this report is all training for us, but it has that sort of bias of UK only. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me
Thank you very
say
much,
that
John.
in detail.
Thanks so much. Mohammad, Areeq, any comments on the interactions with the private sector and that part, please?
So, I mean, in our report, we do look at, there's a chapter on the role of the private sector. And I think another aspect that maybe I didn't touch upon is also the challenge of pay between the private sector and universities, and what that also means for the application of open science. Because if you're a scientific researcher now and you're being offered greater compute power, more interesting data, and a higher pay, you're going to undertake that, and potentially more freedom. You're going to undertake that research in a private company who may not have an interest in sort of publishing failed results and all these other things that we might expect. So there's a lot more detail in the report also on the role of the private sector, but yeah, I'll look into those links, John, that you shared. Great,
thank you very much. Ish, please, then Francis and Paige.
Hello, let me show my face first.
Good evening.
Thank you. Two very interesting presentations. My name is Natarajan Ishwaran, and as Anna referred to me, people call me Ish. I work for the Deep Time Digital Earth. It's an International Union of Geological Sciences initiative to promote data-driven research in geological science. Now, I have lots of questions, but I'll stick to two. I think the boundary or borderline between AI ethics and open science could turn out to be a pretty volatile territory. My first question is to Areeq. It's an event-based question. You had an event in Beijing between Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society on AI ethics. When did it happen? Are the outcome of that event publicly available?
So it happened in November last year. We are going to publish a summary, a very high-level summary of what was discussed. But an overview, basically, we had researchers from both China and the UK present. First of all, some of their AI-based scientific research, but then also some of the key ethical challenges that they were facing and ways to approach it. This is also part of a series, so we are doing this on an annual basis. And they're coming to London later this year, and we're hoping to talk about operationalizing AI safety. So we've had two in the series so far. The first was looking at sort of broad ethical challenges with a focus on the pandemic at the time. The second was ethics and scientific research more broadly, and now we're looking at actually implementing what are best practices when it comes to implementing some of these AI ethics principles. But we are hoping to publish something, but it may be while it's quite slow work, even if it's a short document. So it might be 6 months or so.
So the summary will be available sooner or later. Okay. My second question is about large language models. There's a lot of interest in discipline-based GPT creation, and we have an exploratory research project on creating a GeoGPT. But the large language model developers, most of them are technology or engineering kind of people, and in their hunt for data, sometimes go into data platforms and access data and do not adequately acknowledge where they got their data from. And sometimes also go into what might be generally called quote unquote dark websites and download data. So there are risks in the preparation of the large language models in terms of what is open science and how it is practiced. Has there been any discussions of that nature in either of your groups which led to your presentations?
I can speak to that. So we did definitely have discussions about that. I think my understanding at the moment is that there's at a very high level, we can recognize two camps in the discussion. And in a way, these two camps also align with people's political views on how economy should be arranged. And I'll explain what I mean with that. So there's a group of people who say, you know, share your data. You shared your data with the intention for it to be used. And as long as it is used by other people, it doesn't matter whether they recognize, whether they acknowledge or not. For me, in my head, this is like a sort of center-right view in economy, where it's like, you know, put it out there, something good will happen, we'll see what happens. And then there's a camp that maybe better aligned with the sort of left-wing politics, who's like, well, suppose I and many other people share our data. The one who can harvest the data most efficiently and most productively is the one who's at the top of the food chain. It's the corporation, is the international conglomerate that has all kinds of services and resources to harvest and make sense of this available data. And at the moment, they not only not attribute credit and acknowledge the fact that this data was acquired from this and that place or was generated by this and that place. On top of that, what they do is that they monetize these services and then they sell it back to us again. You know, like you can see this in like large language models that are now using generative AI systems like ChatGPT or companies like Google, you know, like they have used open data and are selling the same services that they generated using those free information back to us. So in a way, this is kind of creating a vicious circle that is only benefiting those companies. So again, in my understanding, there's two camps. There's a camp that says, publish it, it doesn't matter. It will ultimately benefit all of us. And those tools that these companies generate will also affect our workflows, will also have a positive impact on how we do our science and discover and so on. But there's another group of people who say, well, wait a minute, they are actually making money out of this. And, you know, they are becoming bigger and they are creating a monopoly over everything we do. So that is my understanding of how this debate is happening. And I think that partly depends on how people see economy and people's other views. You know, this is not just about open science or generative AI. It's related to people's worldview.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Francis Page-Gilles. Francis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And thank you very much to Areeq and to Mohammad for a really good discussion. And two interesting, challenging papers as well. I just have 2 points that I'd like to make. The first one is with regard to the discussion on the medical data. And I think this is going to become increasingly important, not just the medical data, of course, but the use of AI on medical data. We see that here in Europe with the European health data space. We see that in China, India, Japan, other places too. Also with the DSI project that's going on in Africa. We see that as well. So it's becoming a very interesting area. And I think that we also see enormous progress being made. For example, work that's being done using LLMs in order to identify target molecules to address diseases. So this is huge. These are huge, huge databases that we need to look at, or the similar things that we do with genomic databases. They're huge databases, and we do need LLMs or some kinds of, let's say, query platforms and ontologies that we can address them to. Another one that's just coming out right now, much more, let's say, closer to us in a way, is the use of large language models and ontologies to identify clinical trial sites. Now, this is really important for patients and also important to get the correct clinical trials to the correct patient populations. So these are things that we see here. And if we just look at this in the small realm, let's say, of health research, which is huge, we can see that there's a huge relationship, if you want, between, let's say, proprietary data, or what we call in Europe, sovereign data, and open data, open sources. We need to look at the relationship between those two and how they're related to one another and how they can benefit one another. And I think that's critically important here too. And I think related to that is, and Areeq has mentioned it in his document here, the role of evaluation under your chapter there, Areeq, on research skills and interdisciplinarity. If we are going to get people to move into open science, there has to be frameworks within the research community for these people to move into open science. I think Mohammad has made really, really good points here. People don't feel comfortable just putting their data out there without knowing what's going to happen to it and how it's going to be evaluated or how they're going to be evaluated against it. And also, people need to have frameworks in which they can understand how they can use open data and AI tools within their research and do so comfortably. So I really do think we need, if we're going to move into a comfortable place in open science, then the method, the way to get there is through research evaluation. Thank you.
Great. Many thanks, Francis, for the comments and the reflection. Certainly something for us to think about, and that resonates also with some of the posts that we see here in the chat as well. Thanks for that. Paige, please, you are the next.
Anna, can I add something to what was just
go ahead, Mohammad. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francis. One thing I would like to add to your earlier point about the use of large language models and AI to analyze and process medical data, especially in the context where you have like huge data sets or when you have multimodal data sets. Granted that AI models can be extremely helpful in those contexts, but I think given that one of the major tenets of open science is reproducibility, we hit a wall because when we use AI models to analyze these huge data sets or multimodal data, it is likely that humans cannot even attempt to reproduce or replicate results. On top of that, if it's a very complicated task, we may not have alternatives. We may not have even alternative AI models that can reproduce or that can replicate what the first one did. So in that sense, we are painting ourselves into a corner because we are using systems to do things that we cannot verify. And I think that is a dangerous trend. And the more of those tasks we have that we delegate to a complicated system that has all kinds of errors and biases and proves to be, inadequate in conducting certain tasks, the more unreliable our science will be. Like the more of these tasks we delegate to systems, the more unreliable our science is going to be. So it's kind of a difficult, we are entering a difficult paradigm in a way, because on the one hand, like especially among open science advocates, we are really pushing for reproducibility. And then on the other hand, we are developing systems and using systems in such complicated tasks that cannot be verified. So I would be constantly aware of that what tasks are we delegating to AI, and are they verifiable using other methods?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just respond to that
Francis.
briefly?
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
yeah. Verifiability is very important. And I think all of these scientists are completely aware of how important this is. And our medical community is aware of it as well. But if you're getting a CT scan, you do want AI. And the doctor who's using it wants the AI because the AI can do much more than the doctor can do. But the verifiability still rests with the doctor. It's also the case, if you're looking for a molecule to treat somebody with a rare disease, a genetic disease, then you have so many genetic indicators. Plus, you have so many chemical entities to look at. You need it. So it's a question of how we use and how we verify. And this is what these people are doing when they're building these AI models. They're looking for verification.
Thank you. I think it's a discussion that could be a whole other event and another paper. Probably there already are some, but very, very interesting and very good to think about as well. Paige, please go ahead, then Gilles.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Ezra, for hosting this. And thank you, distinguished speakers and also attendees. That prior discussion was very poignant and very interesting. My name's Paige, and I'm attending this, and I attend many of the working groups as a researcher and also an entrepreneur who's slowly building a protocol for open science and open research publishing. And our approach has always been to authenticate the provenance of the research first. And so our model of what we're building is called Frontier Registry, and it's on the blockchain. It's using blockchain. Of course, now these AI tools, in the last year and a half, are very exciting, and we're looking at all kinds of ways that we can implement it. But one of the things that happened early on was this, horrifying, if I may say, hallucinations by AI, and I don't find that anyone actually has really 100% corrected for that. The prior discussion about synthetic data is very relevant to what we've been building and very relevant to Frontier Registry, and is definitely fully in alignment with what our approach has been. But I do see some of these research platforms now being funded. There's one called Iris AI that's just closed another $7 million in funding. And I'm not sure if anyone, I would love to hear what your comments are actually about that, that vulnerability, that weakness, because how, as was just pointed out in the last discussion, we don't know what we don't know. So how are we ever going to be able to know and distinguish what's being hallucinated and fabricated and what's not? So that would be my question to the speakers and to the general audience.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mohammad, Areeq?
I mean, that is definitely relevant, and I think we are all challenged by it. So in terms of hallucination, there are now systems like ChatGPT offer GPTs that are a little bit more are less prone to hallucination. So a GPT is basically something like a plugin that can be that is developed by third parties and is shared openly on the GPT store, and you can basically use that to deal with the hallucination problem. For instance, in the case of hallucination of scholarly papers, there's now new GPTs that offer citations that are actually not fake. So biometrically they are correct, but biases and errors could be elsewhere, like in terms of how the data was synthesized or in terms of how certain papers were selected. So that is to the hallucination problem that it can be resolved over time. I think in terms of authenticating, like there are tools being developed like watermarking and so on, but I think we are going to see a sort of arms race. It's like in the 90s and noughties when computer viruses were a big thing. For a very long time, there was this battle between those who were creating antivirus and those who were creating viruses, and it was going on forever and ever. And at some point, we just forgot about it, or I don't know how we resolved it. I'm not really familiar with that scene, but I expect that here too we will get to a point of saturation at some point, using technology, obviously.
Right. Thank you very much, Mohammad. Gilles, and then Henning. Please, everybody,
Yeah,
if you could just present yourselves also for those who don't know you.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you, Anna. My name is Gilles Dubochet. I'm the head of open science at the EPFL in Switzerland, and I'm the chair of the ORD National Coordination Group of Switzerland, which is a high-level strategic body around open research data in Switzerland. So first, thank you very much for these presentations. I really appreciated these two talks. They were extremely insightful and very, very interesting. I think these questions, you presented the challenges and the opportunities in a very powerful way. I felt this was very relevant. And what I wanted to say first is that it's very relevant because these are not theoretical questions that are waiting for us in the future. They are in what we are right now, both in terms of researchers trying to work out what to do with these open, these artificial intelligence tools, but also in terms of policy making. Right now, Switzerland signed a contract with an editor that contains AI-related clauses of what can and can't be done with publications. And that's something that is happening in a lot of countries currently, that we are committing for multi-year rules around how AI and publication are being managed. And that's what's happening right now. So these are like real things that are in the pipeline now, not some future-looking things. Anyway, what I wanted to say is a comment that will turn into a question, is connected to these challenges that we're trying to solve around the credibility of data, how to manage the matter of competition when you are dealing with data that feeds into AI, with the risks about the quality of what comes out of AI and all that. These are problems which I feel, and I'm happy to have your opinion on that, but I feel that basically if we're trying to solve them in a context where everyone is trying to run behind their own AI tools and trying to like take data off the internet wherever they can get their hands on it, is basically hopeless. We are not going to be able to solve these problems if that's the approach we have. And my feeling is that there is a good chance that the reasonable approach to trying to solve these problems around AI is to think of AI as a new type of data infrastructures, in the same sense that the large facility infrastructure we've been building over time, things like particle accelerators or large astronomy facilities, which have been built essentially. I mean, one reason they are built is because building these tools is so expensive, but the other is because it's a way of managing the interaction within a community of how to basically take ownership and manage the fact that there is a common good object. In the case of a telescope, the telescope. In the case of expensive AI/data science infrastructures, the AI, the large language model and whatnot. And so I really have this, like, for the time being, I would say I'm betting on a future where the most impactful, but also the most well-managed and credible AI-related research enterprises will be done within contexts of communities that develop common good AI resources with a clear understanding of what is the data that's being brought in, how it's being collected using open science approaches, the quality of it, the recognition of the role of different actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so my question for you is, these development of research data infrastructures, specifically those connected to AI, certainly my experience in Switzerland is that the transition at a political level from thinking about funding facility infrastructures to funding data infrastructure is a challenging one. But now we are seeing AI, which are just accelerating the rhythm at which this question has to be solved by an order of magnitude. And the question I have for you is, in the work that you've been doing, in what you've been looking at, do you see some of the elements of this starting to take shape? Are you seeing communities that are starting to organize with this like common good thinking about AI in mind? Or is it something that we are essentially starting from zero? Just to finish with an anecdote before I let you answer, which I think it's a very interesting one. I was recently hearing a presentation by the head of a very large HPC, high performance computing facility, which were talking about the next generation of HPC infrastructure they want to build for the type of future heavy machine learning driven requirements in terms of HPC. And they were talking about building a 250 megawatt computer. So a computer that consumes the quarter of a nuclear power plant. And so that's what they're talking about. But the presentation of it was, we are going to build it somewhere where it's not, where the electricity is cheap, but we're going to keep all the expertise with us. We're going to keep all the IP, so it's going to be our computer. And I think this is so fundamentally flawed as a way of thinking when you're starting to build a facility that consumes as much as the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider of CERN, when it's running at full power. And yet that's kind of the mindset that still exists, at least in this particular example. So yeah, do you see an optimism there in terms of the community building up this kind of mindset? Or are we still very much at zero here?
It's a really interesting question. I might have a stab at it first. So I spoke to someone who had quite a cynical view on the politicians' approach, which is that you can, as a politician, you can open a supercomputer, you can cut the ribbon. You can't do this for some of the things like data wrangling or the other things that need to be invested in, which may be part of the reason why there still remains a much greater political focus on some of the bigger compute power infrastructure. I think there is, I mean, Hugging Face is a good example of AI for public good that is taking place already. And I think the UN has been looking at approaches of creating like a CERN for AI so that you can include some communities in the global south. But I think a lot of these, again, aren't necessarily new issues. I mean, data collection in some of these areas have had less investment in the global south has been going on for decades, you know, improving things like broadband infrastructure, mobile infrastructure, etc. So I do feel optimistic, and I also think there's still an incentive for researchers, both in the private sector and publicly funded, to solve those problems because, you know, taking things like biodiversity, climate change, they require those actions to happen anyway, and these researchers will want to use the best tools, which will require solving some of those problems. I think what you say about the environmental impact is really, really important, and weighing up that cost benefit early will be very, very important because some of these, as you mentioned, some of these tools are contributing towards climate change, and actually, one of the many researchers we interviewed said that the AI's existential risk is actually through its impact on climate change through its energy intensity. But a really interesting question. And maybe Mohammad, if you've got any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what kind of worries me is the use of the term common good, because I mean, I understand what you mean, but I can also imagine that the term and this whole concept can be used by different people in different ways. And you know, one can ask question, common good based on whose definition, or what is considered as common good here in the US is common horrible for people who are in Africa or people who are in Southeast Asia. So what do we mean when we talk about common good? Like in all those sort of discussions and conversations I see happen between industry and academia, especially in the case of AI now, I think because there is so much money involved in it, and there is so many security issues, all kinds of conversations involve someone from, you know, one of the big tech companies that, you know, yes, is this going to help common good? I can imagine that it would, but given that we have presence of someone from one of these big companies, it might be probably also very beneficial for those companies. And for the most part, I don't see like any major development at the moment happening in terms of, you know, providing that common good or sharing that common good to all parts of the world equally. Like many of these AI systems that we talk about are not even accessible in some of the largest countries in the world, for maybe, I don't know, security reasons, for reasons that are described as, you know, keeping our competitive edge or something like that. So in a way, I think the whole idea of, oh yeah, we are doing this for common good is could be used as a pretext to do something else. And that is what I would be worried about, as, you know, and full disclosure, I'm someone with an ethics background. So, you know, I see, when I look at the donut, I first see the hole and then the donut. So that's my take on it. And, you know, when I hear common good, I'm immediately like, okay, common good based on what? Common good for who? Who's talking about common good? Because looking at OpenAI's God, how do they call it? OpenAI's declaration on something. They also talk about common good, but I'm like, well, you know, you are a private company that has investment in this and that and the other. Are you really concerned about common good? Like, to what extent are you concerned about common good? So I would be very cautious of this idea, but I understand that they can be beneficial.
Thanks so much. I mean, just going back to the context, I think in the context of the UN, it is quite understandable what you know, common good is, and there are definitions, of course, that we have over the years adopted, including in the context of our open science recommendation and in the recommendation on the ethics of AI. So, but that it is then very difficult when it comes to implementation, that's for sure. That there are more and more initiatives, particularly driven by different parts of the United Nations system, to really, you know, figure out the best ways of, just like for open science, same thing for AI, to use it for common good, for good, to localize also data more on the other countries where the data is usually not coming from, etc. There are movements for sure, but it definitely is not yet on scale, and it definitely is not yet, you know, mainstream as we would maybe want it to be. But again, it is a moment where it is, I think, important to highlight the issues, particularly for policymakers who are struggling to understand even where some issues could be, where they should, what they should be thinking about, how they should formulate policies or some kind of rules, regulations, etc. So I think already identifying issues, providing some recommendations can be a good start of the conversation, because we're not even there in many instances. Maybe on the ethics side a little bit more, but on all other aspects, including applying open science principles to AI, I think we still have a long way to go. But again, these two particular reports and papers, together with the many things that people have mentioned here in the chat, hopefully is going to help us also to work through this and formulate some, again, high-level recommendations, and just highlighting the major issues to be taken into consideration when taking decisions around these different issues. Henning, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Gilles. Yes.
If you'll just allow me to react on what you just said, because I would really like to emphasize what you just mentioned. I'm also feeling that this ability to make recommendations to political actors or the leadership, senior leadership of academia globally, is really crucial around this matter of artificial intelligence. Because I think when I hear you, Areeq and Mohammad, answer to my question, the worry about, well, yes, but we will be taken over by the large actors, whether it's the commercial actors or it's the big global North research powers that have the capacity to fund certain types of research. Well, this is very true, and it's also my concern. And I think, in a way, my worry is that the status quo, saying we don't touch that politically, and we just let each researcher do their own little thing in their own side, is basically making the choice that this is the future we are heading to, a future in which some of the big actors will control the whole of AI. And I think that's really the nature of my question. But for that, the political leadership around both political and senior academic leadership needs to be aware of the challenge we are confronting. And I'm not sure it is the case right now.
Henning, please introduce yourself. Thank you for joining, and go ahead, ask your question, comment.
Thanks for the invitation. And my name is Henning Schönenberger. I'm heading up a department of content innovation, research data, and open science at Springer Nature. Thanks a lot for the two presentations. They were excellent. When I read the recommendations from the Royal Society's report, I was really happy because I've seen a lot of same views. For example, with regards to safe and ethical use of AI in research. I think we also see increasing worries and concerns of potential abuse of content, open content through AI, and we recently also surveyed researchers and saw that increasing number of researchers have concerns about implications of AI usage of open content and data in the context of misinformation. I think a lot of discussion here that I've been hearing in the last couple of in the last hour or so. I think I have a question to you, which is around AI being a great facilitator also of inclusion in open science. And what I've been seeing, and this is not really totally new, it's about, for example, automated translation or conversion of complex scientific results into simpler ways to reach also general interest audiences. And that is, I think that's very successful, and when we are now able to accept manuscripts from basically all major languages around the globe, and which is great for researchers with from non-native English background. And I think that's of huge say advantages, benefits, and I think that's hugely important to the open science movement as well. I see tools around data analysis, data visualization, which becomes much more easier. So the step for say researchers not necessarily needing to go via coders and developers, but do stuff themselves. I think that inclusion perspective for me is very, very important. And my question is, simply to your opinion, what do you think about this? I see that at times in the discussion about open science a little bit underrepresented, and I think despite the various risks that we also see, and we have a lot of mechanisms in place, we should really also look about the things that really work well, specifically in the area of open science, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to hear your thoughts about that.
Absolutely, and I think that's spot on. And I don't know if you were able to see the image I shared. The first thing we mentioned in the preprint is that these systems can help us transition from open access to meaningful access. And to your point, there's many ways that these systems can help translate, can help facilitate conversation and dialogue among people from different epistemic communities, but also people from across different borders, be it disciplinary border, geographical border, age border, whatever it is. And in that sense, absolutely, like they are super helpful. Another thing that is extremely that should be acknowledged is that these systems can have a major advantage over sort of traditional ways we used to communicate science, in the sense that and also in terms of translation, actually, they allow users to ask questions on the spot. Like if you develop a course, or if you write a science feature about this new article that was developed, a reader passively engages with something that has been written by someone else and might be free of jargon, but still might be incomprehensible for someone who's reading it for the first time. When reading something like that in using generative AI, or when generative AI generates something like that, if you have a question, you can ask on the spot. You can say, oh, copy paste this sentence and say, I don't understand what this means. Please provide some more context. Please provide an example. And that is, again, another layer that can help open science movement in general, and the whole idea of meaningful access. So I fully agree with you, and I think, as I said, this is like one of the first things we mentioned in the paper, that this can help us transition from open access to meaningful access, and that is priceless.
Areeq, any comments?
Yeah, I also agree. This is a huge benefit is the inclusion aspect, not just as you mentioned, the sort of multilingual translation, but also translating across disciplines. So if we do want to see effective interdisciplinary research, actually having these tools explain to different researchers the key ideas or terminology even within each field could be quite useful. Also, people in my own team actually at the Royal Society do use these in terms of a translation tool as well. And potentially you could see a future where actually you're having greater inclusion of researchers, again, from different languages in the automated literature reviews. I think what is a key challenge there is how these programs prioritize or rank different types of research. Like if it's just done on citations, you might still see the same sort of inequalities. But if there's a way for it to somehow assess the substance of the paper, then suddenly you could have really, really useful inclusive research tools.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have Tiffany first and then Ish.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to everyone who has been contributing to this very interesting discussion. I wanted to raise one point because we've heard already different viewpoints on this from participants here, and it's an issue that we continually confront within open science. In order to really make genuine advances in this field and have it be equitable for all, we have to address research evaluation, as Areeq and others have already mentioned. How we assess institutions and how we assess researchers matter. But we've already heard, Henning, you just mentioned this idea of these new tools allowing researchers to be able to do it all and to do it all themselves. On one hand, that's very powerful. It creates access to the tools that we use to create science. On the other, we're adding to the demands on researchers. I was speaking with a friend yesterday in environmental science. We see there's a challenge where grad students might spend weeks, months preparing a piece of software or a tool to do something for their research, something that would take a couple of days for a computer scientist. And Areeq, you mentioned that idea of creating meaningful collaborations between those who have a particular technical skill and those who have a particular research skill or experience, and meaningfully working together. Do you see that there is sufficient attention to this in the existing efforts for research reform? We know that there's activities happening under DORA and now COARA. What do we need to do to advance the integration of AI and generative technologies into these initiatives for reforming research evaluation? Thanks.
Yeah, really interesting. There is, in the UK, there's some movement on this, although it's still quite limited and early. I think the key aspect, whether it's AI or any other technology, is still career development. So people will want to know that it's worth their time career-wise to actually undertake these projects. And also, I think, again, there needs to be, in the future, potentially more collaboration also with public and private research. So if it is the case that a lot of these useful tools or data is held in the private sector, can we still align those tools with publicly sort of public service goals in research as well? So I think a lot of it comes down to incentives, whether it's AI or anything else. And at the moment, this is the key message of our report if you read it in full. At the moment, there isn't enough being done on this. You're seeing a lot of siloed research. You're seeing a lot of barriers, not just technical or skills barriers, but as others have mentioned, divides between communities globally, and it's still being seen as a competitive endeavor by national governments in terms of capturing talent or investment. It's not necessarily seen as a collaborative initiative that we might all want to see still. So I would say it's still pretty early days and a lot of movement to be done.
One thing, let me add something if I can. So one thing that this is one of the aspects that we touch on the preprint as well, and we highlight how generative AI could improve evaluation of scholarly work. and help us hopefully get a little bit further away from this bean counting idea. And in that sense, I think generative AI could be helpful by helping us come up with better measures for impact, like systems that can help us search, for instance, where specific works have been cited or they have been used, or aggregate the use of scholarly content in different platforms. Like you may have a slide that was shared on Zenodo and then might not have that captured by your Google Scholar or your Scopus, but that slide might have been used by someone else. And in that sense, generative AI could help us, trace those use cases more accurately and more efficiently. And reflect on them and create like a synthesis of someone's scholarly work, and help us come up with more sort of comprehensive ways of evaluating scholarly work. But I fully agree that there is an increasing demand on researchers. That is also one of the reasons why there's a lot of emphasis on suggesting to researchers to not use these systems in contexts that they have insufficient judgment or expertise. So that's one of those risky areas. Yes, these systems are extremely enabling and empowering, but we put the onus on the researchers to use them responsibly, to use them transparently, and not to use them in contexts that they have no expertise. Like I can use ChatGPT to write an essay about astrophysics for me, and the essay might make sense. But because I'm not an astrophysicist, I might not be able to see its biases and errors. And the same can be applied to anyone. You can use it for any purpose, but do you have the expertise and judgment to see whether it is actually telling you an unbiased response? Can you fact check it? Do you have the knowledge for that? So to your point, I think there is an increasing demand on researchers, and I think we're still trying to get our head around how to cope with that, how to equip researchers with the skill set to protect themselves from dangers, but also to protect the integrity of science.
Great, thank you very much. Perfect. Ish, please.
Apologies for coming for the second time.
Go ahead, no worries.
We were, in DDE, we have a data platform which is used by geologists from all parts of the world. We're also in the process of creating this GeoGPT, which is geology-specific GPT, rather than a general GPT. Interesting, it's an exploratory research project. We are in the very early stages, but some of the comments which were mentioned, like for example, Mohammad mentioned that he would go and ask ChatGPT to produce a paper on astrophysics. That could happen, but I think if you have discipline-specific or team-specific GPTs, that could be more useful for researchers, teachers, educationists, and so on. However, in the creation of the discipline-specific GeoGPT, access to data, sufficient data to build the necessary LLMs is not an easy thing, because a lot of academic publications which could contribute to these LLMs are not open access.
Mm-hmm.
Good ones. So that's an issue. But anyway, these are issues which has to be addressed and solved, hopefully, as we go along. I have a specific question to Mohammad. You, in your first slide, I think, you were suggesting use of a different terminology, either for open science or open access. And you also, if I might be wrong, I'm just going by memory, you probably talked about equitable access or easy access. And somewhere down the line in your presentation, you referred to the global south, where the operations of open access, at least qualitatively, is not the same as what it is in more advanced economy. So are there discussions to balance those kinds of open access issues in different parts of the world in any of your discussions?
Absolutely. So to your earlier point about context-specific GPTs, I'm just sharing a short blog post that we published 2 weeks ago in Insight Higher Ed about specifically about the use and impact of these context-specific GPTs. One of the challenges we see with these GPTs is that because they're built on generative AI models like ChatGPT, they inherit some of those limitations of these models. For instance, the black box problem or the biases problem. So to your point, they can help us in various different ways, and they can help us address some of those issues of using the vanilla version of systems like ChatGPT, but they introduce new issues. To the second issue, yes, I used meaningful access, and that was the term I used.
Meaningful access. Good.
Yes, meaningful access. And we do discuss challenges related to open access in the Global South. I am someone who was born in the Global South, and I've traveled extensively. I've done, my BA and MA in Europe. Now I'm in the US. So I've seen various different education systems and university cultures, and also different access to resources and to scholarly content. At the moment, I consider myself extremely entitled and privileged to have access to all kinds of scholarly content because I'm based here at a university that has a lot of resources, that has offers access to many libraries. I can do interlibrary loan. I have access to anything I need. But I can imagine that this is not the case for many other people. And in some cases, even if access is there is no meaningful access, in the sense that they might not have the necessary training and skill set to actually understand that. So that is the bridge we think generative AI can help us make to kind of improve the speed of transitioning from open access to meaningful access. And this is particularly helpful for those who are in the Global South, if and only if they have access to these new systems. So in the sense, this is becoming a little bit circular, because we don't have equal access to AI systems around the globe. And that is what is becoming a challenge now.
Anna, can I make an observation which is more pertaining to UNESCO?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I checked, I realized when I was reading the Open Science Recommendation and the AI ethics output of UNESCO in preparation for this and a few other things, both were adopted in the same general conference.
Yeah.
Now, open access, because of relevance to FAIR and things like that, integrates AI, in fact, the co-data, the outgoing president, I think his name was Barron, he refers to FAIR as federated AI ready instead of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But ironically, when I checked, I did a search for open science in the AI ethics document, and I did not find any reference. I might be wrong. It's a hypothesis. People can prove me wrong. So maybe there is some interaction in UNESCO needed between the open science and the AI ethics part, because I think, at least it appears, AI ethics part, it does say a lot of things which are sensible, but at least my search did not come up with it didn't shoot up open science. So maybe something to look at. Mohammed said he has an ethics background and he looks at the whole part of the donut, but maybe the ethics has something to do with the tasty parts too. So hopefully we can work on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ish. Indeed, the two recommendations were negotiated at the same time and adopted at the same time. And we have always made sure that there is that there is synergy between the two. So if open science is not particularly mentioned, open data is. The FAIR principles were not mentioned, but because they were negotiated in the other recommendation at the same time. So you know how it is with the member states, same member states negotiating two documents, but not necessarily adopting the same terminology in both. But we definitely, I mean, this was supposed to be also part of our closing remarks. We definitely now, our priority in this field is going to be to work more closely with colleagues from social sciences that are kind of managing the recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence, particularly looking into the data aspect, but not only the data aspect. And like, there is a lot of other issues there that are very pertinent with open science and where open science principles can apply. So it is also something that the member states have asked us to do. So in the next steps for this work is also to bring on board more the colleagues from SHS who will be present also at the event on Thursday that Ezra will say a little bit more about, maybe in the closing remarks. Great. Ezra, one last question, and then I'll hand over to you for the closing remarks and the next steps.
I have a last question, but I see there's a lot of interesting discussion in the chat. So if somebody's prepared to come instead from the chat, particularly the discussion about working together in the context of open science. So if not, I'll ask my question, but my question is a little bit, you know, in a different angle. So if somebody from the chat is prepared to present that, if not, I shall ask. Here we go. I'll remove my hand and proceed with that. Thank you.
Okay, knowing that we still have 10 minutes for the discussion. So Francis, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's working together is the core of open science. And together means not just, let's say, within academia or just among scientists, but it's also together between, let's say, in a general sense, between science, policymakers, and society at large, communities, or however we see that society. And Anna, maybe I misunderstood, but this is how I understood the recommendation from UNESCO on open science was this was a societal thing. And we're better off when we share what we have. But the challenge is to make that possible. And so what I see with the recommendation on open science, also the recommendation for the ethics of AI, is we have these goals, just like we have the Agenda 2030 and the Strategic Development Goals. We have these lofty goals. Now we have to establish pathways to get there. And this is the hard part. I mean, the goals, and especially the goals are so well presented, they're so well considered. But getting there is, and the objective, I think, of the UN system is to bring people onto a common pathway to achieve goals that do improve our society and that do meet basic needs and things like that across society. So I think cooperation or working together is what's at the core here.
Absolutely.
But I don't think we can do that unless we look for different ways to work together. That's all. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Francis, John?
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Ezra, for the invite. It's obvious that I have a great respect for private enterprise, and I'm proud that I contributed to the IMCA at the Chicago Synchrotron, and Pfizer provided us with the Paxlovid drug. It's the only drug that's effective against COVID. But where does such as a pharmaceutical industry not venture? And the neglected tropical diseases is one such area. And this is a domain where academics coming together and the open science methodologies really have potential, great potential. And the World Health Organization as a coordinator or even providing some seed corn funding and the ideas too for the UNESCO Open Science Funds. And basically, industry doesn't take much interest, although occasionally it does. GlaxoSmithKline has, as a sort of an outreach to do societal good beyond their societal goods that derive for them profit. But in general, the academics coming together, they have limited funds, but each one put together to make a big pot can be very effective. And I put into the chat just now, it's obviously a specialist publication, but it's our own research lab in Manchester contribution, led by my colleague Bill Hunter, now at Dundee, on a target for drug discovery, which is specific to trypanosomiasis, sleeping sickness, and a particular enzyme. And that work has been out there for a long time, but obviously sleeping sickness is not a solved disease. So this whole trend of trying to find ways for open science and the coming together and being able to do good, societal good, and it's not a competition with pharmaceutical industry because they're not interested. But I think it's a very, very fine example of what we can do together in this sort of new landscape that is becoming possible, led by UNESCO. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, of course, for the open science recommendation, it's at the essence of the recommendation itself. So just music to our ears to see a lot of interest in promoting collaboration also in this context. Ezra, you had your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Anna. I think I'll leave my question for Thursday. It may take us in another direction, and I see we're already 52, so we should be rounding up. So I think maybe we'll give a chance for one other question from anyone else. If not, I fear my question is rather big and we won't have time. But we have our session on Thursday, which I should mention in a minute. So we have,
and also maybe yes, if I don't see any hands in our audience, but I mean, this is not the last discussion, obviously, we are having on this issue. I mean, there are so many issues that have been raised. We have to figure out how do we formulate some of this in a recommendation or piece of our toolkit or part of our outlook next year. Mohammad, your paper looking really specifically into the open science definition from the recommendation is extremely helpful for us, kind of guides us in the right direction, combined with what is in Royal Society's reports, what is in some other reports. I think we have a lot still to discuss amongst us to understand precisely what type of recommendations and for whom we wanna formulate through our process. Obviously, there are recommendations for policymakers, but also for researchers and also for developers. So we have to figure out what's the best niche for UNESCO and who the best audience would be and what to target as our priority message to those different audiences. So I don't think the discussion is ending here, Ezra. I think we're just starting it. And I think also for the next steps, I think we have to just continue this discussion after we have done the report and try to see what the priorities might be for the work of this group and of UNESCO in this area as well. I think I'm going to leave it at that. And Ezra, you can close the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Anna. So if we could just please have slide, I think slide 11 up on the screen, please, just to conclude. So just while the slide is coming up on the screen, just to really follow on from what Anna said now, it's clearly a big area of discussion. We have a lot to do. Many very important things raised in the presentations, in the questions and answers, but also in the comments. There's a huge amount of links and reports and things. So we'll go through all those to to really finalize and write a report. I mean, sorry, to analyze or assess all the various things that have been posted and to write a report. But so one of the things that Anna mentioned then was one of our next steps was to prepare a toolkit element. So the toolkit is the Open Science Toolkit. I'll have a slide at the very end about this if you haven't seen it or are aware of it, specifically on this issue that we were discussing today, this interface of open science and AI. And we've already had some very initial discussions with the Royal Society, and Mohammed, the report and the graphic you shared with us today is very useful, as have been many of the other things. So we'll really look at that and see, and ultimately what we want is something with, let's say, to help with their understanding, but also a little more practical guidance on this issue, and exactly to whom and how that should be done needs further discussion. So as certainly as you said, Anna, we're many more discussions in this area, and this is one that's come up in the other working groups as well. In terms of when we have the next meeting, we have rather a lot going on between now and the summer, so probably I would imagine after the summer, so late summer or autumn time, but we can certainly discuss that, and if we feel to do before that, we can certainly do so. But this has been very useful for trying to have a bit more concrete idea of what it is that we want to provide and the understanding and the guidance we can give. So can we go to the next slide, please? And talking of the discussion continuing, and Areeq kindly mentioned this as well before, I believe this was also pasted into the chat. We have an event on Thursday, the 6th of June, between 4 and 6 Paris time, on open science and AI. Now, if you're in Paris or in easy reach of Paris, we'd love to have you here in person. If you please register relatively quickly, if you possibly could. If not, you can follow online. We have what I think will turn out to be a very interesting session. It will be opened by the UK ambassador. We have Professor Alison Noble that Areeq mentioned in his presentation. Areeq will be presenting as well, as will his colleague Denise Albanus, both from Royal Society. We have Laura Joy Belus from the University, St. Joseph University in Beirut, as well as being one of the L'Oreal International Rising Talents. And we have Doreen Ewis, and excuse my pronunciation of people's names, from the ISC, the International Science Council. So we have an excellent panel. So there'll be a keynote speech and then an interactive panel discussion. So we're looking forward to a very exciting, interesting event then. So please, everyone welcome online or ideally in person if you are close enough to join us on Thursday. Next slide, please. And as I say, the link to this was shared in the chat. So if you scroll back in the chat, you'll find that link. So here's just the final slide in case you're not aware of our website, QR codes and the links there. So you can see the details of the working groups, of this working group and the other working group. The reports will be emailed, but also shared on here. The toolkit, you can find the Outlook, the Open Science Outlook. If you haven't, please download a copy there, and also the index, which was mentioned, which was the one of the outputs from this working group, the Index of Open Science Infrastructures. So with that, I'll say thank you for your continued interest. We had almost 100 participants, which we're very pleased about. So thank you again. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Thank you very much for all the interactions, all the questions and responses. Let me thank again our speakers. So Areeq and Mohammed, really appreciated. They were excellent presentations and led into some very interesting and thoughtful discussions. So thank you all very much. Thank you to everyone for joining, and we look forward to our continued discussions and information from you in the future. So with that, I'll say thank you very much and close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.